I'm gonna come over here. We'll fire first. Okay. My name is Catherine Winch. I am 42 years old. Can you believe that? I'm 42.
Yeah.
I'm 42 years old, and this is my paternal grandfather, Hugh Hubbard, and we're just going to talk. I'm going to ask you some questions. Okay. All right. So, tell me about what it was like growing up, about your life growing up. What do you remember?
Well, I lived in Churchill, moved from over there and when I was 10 years old, so my first 10 years, and I really don't remember a whole lot about that. I started school there at Nathaniel Bacon, grade school, and then we moved to Northside on Overbrook Road, and I went to Chandler Junior High School, and then from there I went to John Marshall High School, and my girlfriend at the time was going to TJ. She was a year behind me in school, and actually in that area, I don't know how the schools work today, but back then they had certain sections you had to go to this school or that school, and in the area that we lived in, we had a choice. We could go either one. I picked John Marshall, and I was in the cadet corps there. And so they wanted to start the cadet corps at Thomas Jefferson, and they asked for volunteers to go over to help start it. And of course, my wife was there, and I wanted to be with her, so I actually volunteered to go over and help start the cadet corps at Thomas Jefferson. That's been 70-some years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so growing up, tell me about life at home. You had a sister. Tell me about your mom and dad.
I had a sister that was 5 years younger than I am, and I did quite a bit of cutting grass. I worked at a drugstore making deliveries on a bicycle. I think I started out making about 10 cents an hour, and I worked 2 or 3 nights a week. I carried papers. I had a push mower, wasn't a motorized mower. You had to push it, you know, and it would. But I would had certain customers. I would cut their grass, but the yards were small. It's not like you see today. It was. But I made money that way, you know. Okay, my spending money.
And tell me about your mom and dad and sister.
All right, my mother, she was 10 years younger than my father, and because she lived up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and we came to visit her sister, which was living in Richmond at that time, and so she started working at the Millen Roads at that time, and that's where she met my father. He was a rug salesman at that time, and that's how they met. But he quit school in the 5th grade and started working in a furniture store, and he was in that business his whole life, right up to that.
So never graduated from high school?
No. Well, my mother did neither. I mean, neither one of them did. But I don't know.
Was one of your parents more strict than the other one?
Well, you know, I really didn't. My daddy was at work all the time. You know, he worked like 6 days a week. I can remember on Sunday sitting around reading the paper. But no, I think my mother was probably the strictest on it. But they weren't really strict with me. I was a good boy.
And were they happily married?
Oh, yes, very much so. but I'm probably more like my mother, to tell you the truth, in that she didn't want to go anywhere. She was happy to stay at home. And I know that a lot of the family, my aunt and uncles, she was from a big family, would go up to the old home place every summer for a week. My mother wouldn't go because my daddy had to work. He couldn't get out, and she would say that she was not going to leave him. But I think they were a very devoted couple, they really were.
And when did they pass away? How old were you?
Let's see, they passed away in 1964. My mother was just turning 64, and my father was just turning 74. So I was about 50, getting close to.
And how did they die?
My father had lung cancer, and so, and then my mother died of heart failure, and she died 9 months after he did.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's right, because she was 10 years younger. So she died 9 months after?
After he did. He died in December, and then she died that following September.
Wow. And did she have a heart attack?
She was in the hospital when she died, but she had a lot of problems physically. She had high blood pressure and had been operating on that. But I think in the end it was just hard to. She had diabetes. Body just wore.
Yeah. And tell me about your sister.
Well, my sister ran off and got married when she was, I guess, I'm going to say 15 or 16 years old, and that marriage did not last because she had one son.
With that first husband?
With that first husband, and he just ran off. And so, she didn't get any child support in it.
How long was she married before?
To him, I would say a couple of years, maybe at the most.
And how did your parents feel about her getting married at 16?
Oh, they were upset about it because she ran off. She couldn't get married in Virginia, so they went to South Carolina and got married, where they could have got, at that age.
And what was it like, the two of you? Did you get along when you were growing up?
We really were not close at all.
What was the age difference?
5 years.
She was 5 years younger?
Yeah, I was born in 1925. She was born in May of 1930.
Okay. And did she remarry after?
She remarried, and she was pregnant with my nephew before he was born. And so then my mother kind of took care of Jimmy for a while, and but she really had problems. It ended up that Jimmy came to live with us when he was about 7, I think, and he lived with us until he finished high school. And then he went into the Air Force from there. Spent 20 years. He lives in Maryville, Tennessee now.
Okay, so tell me about, you were telling me the other day about when you were building the tree house, the first time that you met Granny. Tell me that story.
Well, it was just a big old ravine out in front of her house, and it was a great big oak tree there, a huge tree, and a bunch of us got together and decided we would go build a tree house in it. And so we would go out and get wood and bring it back, and it must have been 10 or 12 of us. And at that time, my wife was living right across the street in a new house over there that had just been built. And she would come over and watch us, and that's when I first noticed her, and I guess she noticed me.
And how old were you?
Well, I think I was probably 15 or 16 years old then, and I think I went to her 13th birthday party, and and she dated a lot of boys. I never did date anybody but her.
Nobody else didn't
No,
date anybody
no,
else.
well, I say no. I think one time she was dating a friend of mine, and we were all together that afternoon, and my friend was taking her to the show that night, and so there's another girl with us, and I asked her, and I was miserable the whole night.
Because you wanted to be with Granny,
Well,
or
you know,
just
well, I knew, that they had a date that night, and but the other girl was with her, and I said, "You want to go to the show tonight?" And she said, "Yeah," So I took her to the show. But I never did do much dating.
yeah. So tell me about the cadet corps in school. What does that entail?
Well, when we started at TJ, we had 6 companies, which is probably 30 to 40 people in the company, and of course it was made up of the captain and 2 lieutenants, and then you have maybe 4 or 5 sergeants and corporals, and But I was captain of C Company, and of course, at that time, and I don't know whether they still do it or not, there was the captain would choose somebody to be his sponsor, and then of course most of them would take their girlfriend, and she would probably kind of be like the Corps sweetheart for the company,
Oh, from the officer got to pick?
The captain, yeah.
Captain.
I was the captain, and all the other captains were 6 companies, and each one of them had a sponsor, which was their girlfriend. I don't know how many of them married, but I ended up marrying my sponsor.
So do you remember asking Granny to be the sponsor?
Oh yeah, she was tickled to death. Yeah.
And was it the sponsor for years, or did
For that year?
For that year.
Because when I left school at that time and went to Marine Corps, and so anyhow, someone took the company. You were only there for one semester.
Oh, okay.
Then you would either move on or move out or whatever.
Okay. And did she have any responsibilities as the sponsor, or?
Well, she would go to, if we had any meetings and the things, she would be at the meetings, or any gathering we had, she would always be there. And she had a little uniform that she wore, and different from everybody else, and she would wear the company colors, and.
Wow. Would all the companies meet at one time, or the 6?
No.
So she would be the only girl in the room?
No, well, yeah, she would meet with my company. She would be the only girl there.
Huh. Yeah. But it was a special designation.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that didn't happen too often, but we would have meetings from time to time, and maybe at somebody's house, and she would come to that, But mainly in school, everybody knew who she was and whose sponsor she was, and
Did she wear that uniform every day?
Yeah, sure did. I don't even think they do that anymore, but.
And that you had a uniform too?
Oh yeah,
as a cadet?
I wore mine every day, yeah.
But there were students who were not in the cadet corps, and they didn't have uniforms.
They didn't have uniforms, right.
Okay. How many people were in your company?
About 60.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And there were 6 of those?
6 companies, yes.
Wow. Okay. That must have been a big portion of the school.
Well, no, it wouldn't. I would say probably 50% of them or more were not in it, because they didn't even have a military. John Marshall had one for years, the cadet corps, ROTC training. But Thomas didn't have, but this was like during the war, and that's when a lot of the schools wanted to get in for more training for the fellows.
Okay. Now tell me about joining the Marines. How old were you?
18 when I went. I was 18 in January, and I went in June.
Okay. And you had not finished high school, right?
Well, I had finished all, but I lacked a few credits, and it was just one subject, really, in English. And so I did not get a diploma until after I came back. After I was discharged from Marine Corps, actually.
Okay. And how long were you in the Marines?
Well, less than 3 years. I went in. I was in '43, and I went to boot camp. From boot camp, I went to sea school in Portsmouth. And while I was there, before I had finished sea school in Portsmouth, they needed volunteers to go aboard an aircraft carrier that lacked eight people in the Marine Corps, and so they asked for volunteers, and so I left before the ones I had originally gone to sea school with, they finished the course, and went aboard ship in 1943. So that all happened, boot camp, sea school, and aboard ship, all in the same year.
Wow.
In '44, we were in the Pacific, so I was in the Pacific 44 and 45 until the war ended.
And what was that like? What was your role on the ship?
I was a Marine gunner. I was also the executive officer's orderly. I was one of them. Each one of them had the captain had an orderly and the executive officer, 24 hours a day. That would be with them, take messages, and do errands or whatever.
Okay, so tell me about your role on the ship. What were you doing?
Well, mainly I was in the gun tub. We had firing practices. Quite frequently when we weren't in enemy waters. Keeping the guns clean.
And what's it? Describe a gun tub.
It was maybe 30 foot by 12 foot, something like that, and it had 5 guns in it. And they had 3 Marines assigned to each gun. One would be the gunner, one would be the loader, it's a magazine that shot 60 shells. When the magazine was empty, he'd take it off and put another one on it. And then they had one that cranked it, then the gun up and down for the correct elevation.
And what would you be shooting at?
Well, when it was having firing practice, a plane would fly by carrying a sleeve, and we would shoot at the sleeve. Of course, actually in combat, we would be shooting at the enemy.
At planes?
At planes, yeah. They were coming in.
Did you shoot any down?
Well, people have asked that, with the whole side of the ship firing guns,
right.
Who knows?
But planes did,
Oh yeah, I've seen them hit the water, but just before they hit the ship.
Really?
Yeah.
Japanese?
Japanese, yeah.
Wow, so planes flying towards the boat, and it is shot down right before?
Well, most of them were shot down before they got it, but the Hornet, all the other ships in the transport was supposed to protect the aircraft carriers. Because that was when the flyers were out bombing or whatever, that was their only home to get back to.
Right.
And so, in most cases, the enemy was after the carriers. That's what they wanted.
And what were they shooting at the aircraft carrier? Were they going to drop a bomb on it? Were they going to crash into it?
Well, a lot of them would just crash their plane and they're suicide,
Wow.
But they had torpedo planes, which shoot torpedoes for it. Of course, they had subs out there too, submarines that, we were never hit by a submarine or never was hit by a bomb, really.
Wow.
The whole time, but we were mighty lucky. A lot of ships were.
And if a Japanese plane was shot down by the Hornet, would it just sink and it's gone with the pilot?
Well, in most cases, a lot of times they'd go down and the plane would be burning when it'd go home because of the gasoline and the bullets hitting the thing, and they would, most of them, a lot of them, although I did see some hit the water, and you could see movement in a plane, and they would pick up survivors, from time to time, and bring them aboard ship. And of course, we would keep them until we were closer to a port or something. We could let them off. But most of the ships didn't have room to take them, so the destroyer would pick them up and bring it over to the ship. And
wow. Now, what about seeing people that you knew die? Did that happen? People around you?
Yeah, I had a good friend, Pete Lamprinos, that was killed in May of '44, I guess it was. But it was an accident where one of the planes on the flight deck, hydraulics had given, and the plane dropped down when they were warming the engine up, and the propeller hit the deck, and the piece flew off him right in the head, So he wasn't in my gun tub, but he was in my next gun tub over from me.
Wow, how old was he?
I think he was about 20. He was a little bit older than I was. He wasn't married, but he was from New York. He was always telling me, they would tell me about how many movies they had up in New York. He said, Hubbard, I'm going to take you up to New York.
And were you married before?
Oh, no. I didn't.
But you and Granny were dating?
We were dating, yes. Yeah.
And you had been dating for a year or two?
Yeah, for a very good while, yeah.
And how did you communicate with her while you were gone?
Well, letters is the only way, a lot, and sometimes I'd go for a month without getting mail, and we had to wait for another ship to bring the mail over to us. That wasn't top priority. But I know a lot of times I would get 15 letters at one time, and I'd usually look at the dates on it, and I would look at the last one first, and then I'd go back and get the rest and look.
And where was the Hornet stationed again? Where was it at sea? What part?
Well, it was all over the Pacific, everywhere. We followed the fleet. Wherever the fleet, we were part of the fleet.
Okay.
And it's usually about 70 ships in a fleet. 70? Huh?
70?
Yeah. But there would be usually 3 aircraft carriers, and then you would have your destroyers, and you would have your cruisers, and so it was a big miles across,
Wow.
But the aircraft carriers would always be in the center.
All 3 of them?
Over there, but because the planes were coming in any direction, other ships could get to them before we did.
Wow. And when Granny would write you, did you wrote her back?
I didn't write as much as she did.
And were you excited to get the letters from her?
Oh, yeah, it was good. Particularly at first, but after a while, everything fades.
Yeah. And what kind of things would she update you on in the letters? I can't remember. I can't answer that. I just don't know. Just life in general.
Yeah, it's life in general. She would say what she was doing as she went down to Millen Road to Tall Hammers, and I do remember that in one of the letters she was talking about steps that she could go in on and get on the step, and the step would go up to the next floor. And I remember, laying there trying to figure how in the world that could be.
Like an escalator?
Well, that's what they were talking about when we were putting escalators in the stores, and I could not imagine how that could be, that you would get in and stand on a step, it would go on up to the next floor.
That's funny. Yeah, I couldn't picture it.
No way until I got home and saw, what it was doing. Yeah.
Wow. Was there anything else that changed, when you were gone for 2 years? Anything else surprise you?
No, I really can't remember. I know when I first came home, I knew I had to get a job, so I started working at DuPont. And then after that, that's when I decided that I'd like to go back to school when they came in with the GI Bill, because they didn't have that when I got out, at least not to my knowledge anyhow. But the guys that I was working with at DuPont, they were the ones that really encouraged me to go back and see about finishing school. And
all right, let me ask you this. You're out at sea, you're shooting down planes, you're seeing, I mean, war at, up close and personal. What was it like to go back to just everyday life where people are complaining about having to wait in a line too long, or was it?
That was a hard adjustment for me. It was much harder for me to adjust getting back home than it was going in. It really was. But see, imagine, I went for 20 months and never hit a port. I didn't see anybody, just, in most cases, I know when a land would show up, off at a distance, it would say, look, land, but we would go for weeks and weeks and never see land.
Wow, 20 months.
20 months. Now, we would go in to pick up supplies just in a lagoon. They would have freighters to come in and out with supplies. And then, I'd be on a work detail along with a lot of other people. We'd go over and these nets, with sugar and salt and canned goods and stuff like that, and then take it back to the ship for supplies. And we would probably get in one of the lagoons maybe once every 3 or 4 months. And sometimes we would get the mail when we went into it, that the freighters would bring it in.
Wow. So when you get back and you're trying to resume life as normal, what was the hardest part of adjusting?
Well, first of all, I did a lot of arguing with my wife, and she was arguing with me, and I was, it was hard. It really was. She had started smoking and drinking, and and that bothered me, and so we argued about everything.
And how long was anything else hard about just kind of life as normal when you've been out in this war zone?
No, well, I don't know. I just can't. I can remember it was a hard adjustment getting back. It was different, and I'm a routine person, and I had a routine. I knew exactly what I was doing, from day to day, and I was mighty lucky. I really was.
Yeah. Now, how long between when you got back from the war until you proposed to Granny?
Well, I got back. I got discharged in October of '45, and we got married in August of '46. So I was
okay.
So in between that time, I had given her a ring, but then I took it back one time.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, I was going out to Richmond studying mighty hard, and she had said that she was going to a movie with Jane Leach, which was a girlfriend of ours. And so I had been studying that night at home, and I got to thinking about her. So I ended up going down to Jean Lynch's house, walked down to her house, and mother looked mighty funny when I got there, and Jean Lynch's mother, So I sat there and talked to her for about an hour, and the girls hadn't come in. And then when he came back, 2 soldiers brought him back. So I took my ring off her finger right that night. and I gave it back to her probably in a couple of months, you know.
And how did you know they were soldiers? Were they?
Well, they had the uniforms
They
on.
did. What kind of soldiers? Like in the army?
Army. It was army, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So how did you ask her to marry you the when you gave her the ring the first time?
And I just said that I think it's time we got married. Oh, she was saying that to me.
Yeah, because you had been dating since, I mean, you met her when you were 16, right?
Yeah. But I think it really what was pushing her that her mother had died, and her father remarried 9 months after, you know, that she died, because he had been going with this woman for a long time, and I knew it when I was dating with her, you know, because she would tell me. But
and how old was Granny's mom when she died?
I think it was 37. She was young lady.
And how did that affect Granny, losing her
Well,
mother?
you know, she was miserable living at home, and particularly when her father got married, she felt like she had lost, not only lost her mother, but she had lost her father too. So she was very unhappy at home, and her sister was the same way, you know. She had a sister that was, I think, 13 years old at that time. And Betty was and the lady that he married, they would just fight and feuding all the time.
So Granny was ready to get married and settle down.
Well, she talked to me, you know, she was the one who was really pushing to get married, you know.
And I guess back then, did she stay at home until you guys got married?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like today a lot of people move out on their own.
No. In fact, she moved into my mother's house. I rented 2 rooms from my mother when we got married, and so she stayed there until we went down on Mills Road. But this was, Bobby was just a baby when we went down there. So, and I ended up had 2 rooms and a kitchen at my mother's. But they always had renters in.
Okay.
Ever since even Church Hill, when I lived there, I can remember I don't ever remember just living at home without having renters in there.
And how old were you when you got married?
Well, I was, 21?
Okay. And how long were you married?
Well, almost 69 years, yeah. It would have been, let's see, in 2015, yeah, it's, we were married in August, and she died in June, so if she'd made it to, you know, end of August, it'd have been 69 years.
So are you glad you gave her the ring back?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think she knew she'd get it back, but she was destroyed when I caught her.
She didn't do that again, did she?
No, I hope not. Not that I know of.
Yeah.
I didn't catch her. She did.
Yeah. All right, tell me about your wedding.
Well, it was just a very simple wedding. And the church was right next door to where we lived, you know, on Old Brook Road, and it was just a small wedding and reception. We walked from a church over to, and the only people came was family.
How many people would you say?
At the wedding? Gosh, I don't know, 30.
Okay.
Wasn't a whole lot, really wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And we, you know, it wasn't a white dress and all that. I had a suit and she, yeah.
What was do you remember what Granny wore?
I can't remember. No.
All right, so tell me about when you were starting your own family and had 3 3 kids, and just take me through those beginnings.
Of course, it wasn't long when we were married, and she got pregnant with Carolyn. It was devastating, because she did not want any children. Not then, she was just figured she was just starting, But it didn't bother me. And then when Bobby came along, it really threw for a loop when she found she was pregnant with Bobby. But I think when Judy came along, she really wanted another child, but that was some years later.
Yeah.
We were in Kinston at the time, and I'd gotten a promotion, moved in.
Was Granny a good mother?
Yes, she was. Yes.
What made her a good mother?
What made her a good mother? Well, I think she loved her children dearly, although that she wasn't particularly happy when she found out she was pregnant, certainly with Bobby and Carolyn. But she was a devoted mother, and she would really work with their homework when they needed, but she was just a good mother. She took care of them, dressed well kept. Yeah, no, we had a smooth running family, really did.
Now, tell me about your career at Sears.
Well, I started working with Sears part-time when I was going into the University of Richmond. I had my classes scheduled where I could take my classes in the morning, and then I had the evenings free to go. I would leave school and go right straight to Sears and work. And I worked part-time for, I don't know whether it may have been a year or so, but anyhow, I was getting $90 a month from the government when I was going to school. And I just came to the point that we couldn't live off, what I was making. And I started working part-time, and it was hard. I was taking a full course at Richmond, and still working 30 hours a week, or better at Sears.
Wow.
So something had to go. So, and it was the right decision. And
so something had to go, so you stopped.
So I had to go to college. Yeah.
To go work full time.
Full time, yeah. But then I was there 6 years before they transferred me to Kinston, North Carolina. And I was in there 2 years, and they brought me back to Richmond to manage the department that I worked in here as a manager. And then from there, I moved up to the merchandise office, which I had probably 10 or 12 departments, that I was in charge of. And then we became a group, and I ended up with 6 stores in Richmond. We had 4 stores in Richmond, 1 in Petersburg, 1 in Charlottesville, that, we had kind of responsibility. And then they combined the Norfolk group and the Richmond group together, which was 4 stores down there. And I was one of them that kept my job, but I had to move to Virginia Beach. So I was down there for 4 or 5 years. And then the opening came up in Greensboro, and they wanted me down there. So anyhow, I went down there, and I worked there for 5 years before I retired, but I stayed there after I retired.
Mm-hmm. Was your job stressful?
Well, I had like 32 stores in 5 states, and some stores I wouldn't even get in once a year, and most of the time I was just trying to put fires out. So I was on the road traveling right much, going to other stores, and every time I had a new store, I was spending a lot lot of time, you know, in that, getting set up in it for the department, but I didn't particularly like the traveling. My wife enjoyed it because she would go with me, and sometimes I'd hit 2-3 stores in a day, you know. But she would keep a car and could go shopping around, but she knew that to be here at such and such a time that I had to leave to go to another store, you know.
And what would the kids be doing if she went with you?
Oh, they were all married.
Oh, when they were older.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were married before I ever went to Virginia.
Oh, before Virginia Beach.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
and
that's
I was still living in Richmond.
That's
you know.
right. That's right.
No,
okay.
all the kids were gone.
So she would use it as an opportunity to see other.
Oh, absolutely. And then I had trips to Chicago, New York, you know, and I would take her with me. I went to Los Angeles once and San Francisco, but she loved those trips.
Would she always go with you?
Not always, but in most cases she would go. Whenever it was possible for me to take her, I would do it.
And would the company pay for that, or did you have to pay extra for her to go?
No, I would normally, because the room, you know, they paid for my room because, you know, two of us could stay in a room. That was no problem. And I think one time I had won a prize when we went to L.A., and I would had to pay the airfare. You know, they would pay for mine, but they wouldn't. And I called Chicago and talked to them, and anyhow, they ended up picking up the tab for her airfare for her to go with me.
Now tell me again, you were telling me the other day that you enjoyed having her on those trips because she would talk to the people.
Yeah,
so tell me about that.
Well, she was really excited, you know, about being there and seeing things that she never would have seen, you know.
Yeah. And did she interact with people you were working with, or?
Well, for the social hour, maybe, you know, we'd get together, but we went to those, we'd be at the meeting all day, and she could, you know, shop around and do whatever she wanted to do. And some of the other wives would be there too, and they would get together, and then, but at nighttime we would go out to eat together, and you know, and socialize there. But that was about it. And then we'd have sources who would come in and set up with drinks and all like that. At one time, a lot of that was going on. Because the sources wanted to sell you more merchandise, and you know, and so. But
yeah. Yeah, that's neat. Okay, so your role as a father, what was your favorite part about being a father when the kids were at home, when they were younger? What did you love the most?
Favorite part? I don't really know that I can add. You know, I think I had 3, 4, counting Jimmy, good kids. I really did, you know, and I was very proud of them. But I would have to say that my wife more or less took care of the kids, kind of like my mother did, you know, that I spent a lot of time working, a lot of time. In fact, it was hard for me to take a vacation. It was easier for me to take 1 or 2 days at a time, because no one filled in for me, and you know.
Now tell me the circumstances for taking Jimmy into your home. What's that story?
Well, Frida was really having problems. He was skipping school, and she'd gotten herself problems running up a credit card and then not making the payments, and they were going to garnish her wages, and then that's when I kind of got into it, because she was working for Murphy's at the time, and they said that they would not accept a garnish from the company, that And so if she couldn't get it straight, they just gonna have to let her go, you know. So anyhow, I paid off the credit card, and I told her I thought it would be best for me to take Jimmy just until she could get herself straight, you know.
And how old was he at the time?
I was 7 years old, yeah. And so he came to live with us was strictly as you know, just until she could get straight, but he never wanted to go back. He wanted to stay, and so he did, and up until, you know, he finished school and went in the Air Force.
Did he stay in contact with his mother?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, in later years, particularly when he was real little, I used to pick his mother up and take her to work, and I'd take him to school, and he would be in the car, and when she would get in the car, she would say, "Hi, Jim boy, how you doing?" And he would be on his knees in the back seat, look at the back room. He wouldn't even look at her, you know. I think he was afraid that she was going to have to go back home, and he didn't want to.
Yeah. Now, tell me about when you were working, and even you've told me the story of being an usher at the church, about your point of view on minorities and African Americans. How do you think about that?
Well, you know, I always felt it was wrong the way the blacks were treated. I mean, even, you know, when I was a teenager, then I was getting into even the work I saw in works, you know, how they were treated, and you know, it's something that I just absolutely felt was wrong. I always did. I know we had a black lady that came and helped us out, or helped my mother out, maybe one day a week, or one day every 2 weeks or something like that. But you know, I mean, you know, with the separate drinking fountains, separate toilets, and then you know, I could see a black didn't know where to put himself, you know. Because I used to eat with her. She never ate with my mother and daddy, but you know, I ate with her quite a bit.
And tell me the story when you were at church, and they were saying that as an usher that you should turn blacks away. And what did you do?
Well, that was a meeting that the officers of the church had called, because that was in the when all this, they were coming to churches, and they wanted to have a meeting, and so everybody understood what to do if blacks came to church and wanted to come in. And so I was at that meeting because I was on the ushering committee at that time. And so they were saying, you know, if a group of them come, just tell them this is a private organization, and it's not everybody is welcome. And if they push your issue, let them come in, but sit them on the back row. And so I told them at that time, if I'm on the door and when they come in, and I'll ask them where they want to sit, you know. But and at that time, it's not like it is now, you know, because ushering was a big thing. It was almost like the weddings now, that when people came to church, you would usher them down to a seat and then come back. And we would have 4 ushers on the door. You know, one of them would be opening the front door, letting people in, you know, greeting them. And then we had 2 others who were taking people back and forth to the pews and sitting down. But, you know, I've always felt it was wrong, and they weren't treated right.
Yeah.
And it's getting better.
Yeah. So what do you think the key to a happy marriage is?
I don't know. I think for the two people to continue to love one another is certainly important. And, you know, and too many times I think finances and children and, you know, get in the way. But, you know, I was always, we didn't have a lot of money, that's for sure. But I was always happy with what we had, and I really wasn't always wanting something more or bigger or better. And I probably have more now because my wife did want more and bigger and better. But I'm just a contented person, you know. I'm real contented right where I am, what I'm doing. Even when I was in the service aboard ship.
Were you always that way, even as a child?
I think I was. I think I took a lot of that from. I think my mother felt that way. She didn't care nothing about clothes. She didn't think anything about traveling, you know, and she just wanted to be at home. And so I think I picked a lot of that up from my mother. And I think it's what you're born with.
Yeah, it's always amazed me that you are just so happy where you are and what you're doing, and not, you know, longing for
But
something.
I've never, you know, I was happy, you know, even when I was in the Marine Corps, and I was over there, you know, and I got in a routine, and, you know, it really didn't bother me, you know.
What do you think the secret to a happy life is?
Contentment. To be content. And so many people I see are not content. They always want something, you know, I don't know what it is. But I like a routine. And as long as I'm in that routine, I'm happy and contented.
So, you know, I do a lot of work with mothers,
right,
and trying to help them, and so many of them are just so stressed out, and feeling that they're not good enough, and trying to be more.
I never felt that. I always felt inferior on my intelligence, you know, at times. I felt like I might be in over my head, and I made it better than I thought I would. But I mean, being stressed out, I don't know that I've been stressed out in my life.
So if you had to give advice to a young mother that was just, you know, worried all the time and struggling, what would you say to her?
I would say, what's your problem? Well, you know, I can see if you haven't got money to buy your food and your kids are starving, you know, I think I would be stressed out too. You know, really.
Right. But if you're not in that situation,
well, you know, then I would say, you know, maybe, you know, I've always been able to live within my means, and, you know, and not worry about what somebody else has got. I know in years, Vaughn would want a bigger house and a better house, and I know when we moved to Notre Dame, you know, that was her dream home, you know, and it sat there empty for almost a year before, because I wouldn't pay the price they wanted to have on it, and then she'd say, I drove by that other day, and this for sale sign is still on.
And you were waiting for the price to go down?
Well, even at the time I bought it, you know, I figured that's a lot of money. I paid $40,000 for that house. and I sold the house I had on Bremen Boulevard, I think, for $2,100. And I said, that house isn't twice as good as that.
Right. Now, tell me about your carving. At what age were you, and how did you pick it up?
After I retired. Not until after I retired. I went up to, we went up to the Biltmore House, and coming back on the Blue Ridge Parkway, there was a museum, folk museum, and I thought it'd be interesting to stop. It was raining, and so it was just Vaughn and I. We stopped, and I went in the door, and they had 3 carvers sitting there carving, and it just absolutely fascinated me. So.
And how old were you?
Well, it must have been, I retired when I was 62, and I must have been 65, 66, something like that.
Wow.
And so when I got back to Greensboro, I tried to find something, and I found the carving classes in Winston-Salem and in High Point, but I couldn't find anything in Greensboro. And then the Guilford College put a catalog, and it had on a wood sculpture. And so I called and asked them, what is this wood sculpture? And they say, well, that's when they carving animals and stuff like that. And I said, that's what I've been looking for.
Wow.
So.
Was it hard for you in the beginning? I mean, not having done it before?
Well, I always loved woodworking. In high school, I did good.
Okay.
In work, and I always built furniture,
That's
know,
true.
and stuff like that. In fact, one Christmas, I made all of the Santa Claus for Bobby and Carolyn. I mean, that was the only thing they got, is what I built them.
Wow.
But I always enjoyed woodworking, but the actual carving, I didn't get into until I must have been 65.
Wow. How many pieces do you think you've carved?
Oh, hundreds, yeah.
Really amazing. Did you enjoy being able to give that to your children as gifts?
Oh, Lord, yeah. Well, I can't carve as good as I used to. My eyes are gone, and I just can't. But no, I feel proud of it. I did it for almost 20 years. Every year I give every member of the family a Christmas ornament. And that's something that's a keepsake that they've got.
Yeah. Do you think you're talented?
No, not really. It's just something that I enjoy doing.
What advice would you give me about life or anything?
Be contented. Just be contented. You've got a lot, Just be contented with what you got. That would be my advice to anybody, really.
Yeah. I think everybody gets there later in life, and I think now we just got to get there.
I think some people, I've heard this saying that, they would be satisfied as a pie taste or something to that effect, that meaning that you don't care what they got, they're never satisfied. They always want something else. But I think contentment is a big factor.
I agree.
And I think I have that.
I agree. And you're teaching all of us that.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
I love you.
Love you, sweetie.